Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Welcome to No Strings Attached Street Ministry. Today I'm going to do a cooking show. I had people request, want to know about my famous spaghetti sauce. So I'm going to show you sort of how a hillbilly Italian does their spaghetti sauce. So one thing I wanted to do for you is to show you that this is something you can actually even cook in your van using just a small crock pot and also a small inverter. My little crock pot with my inverter pulls about 80 watts or so on low, and I like cooking my spaghetti sauce over hours, usually about 5 to 6 hours at a time. So I'll do that like if I'm on the road driving somewhere, let's say for the day. That's when I'll use it, and that's when I'll make that. That way it's done when I get there. And to do that, all you need is one onion. You'll need one small can of tomato paste, and you'll need one large can of crushed tomatoes. And then ground beef, I usually use about anywhere from about a half a pound of ground beef. And I do this all raw. I don't saute all the nonsense. You're on the road, why cook it? It's going to cook anyway. So it's the way I look at it, is just to save time on cleaning dishes and pots and pans. This is something you can just throw together and be done with. And it's the cooking time over time that you do that. And I'll show you, today I'm making it actually for my family at home. So we're light eaters when it comes to spaghetti. So usually there's only 3 of us there. So, and I use the big crock pot when I'm at home. But I wanted to put this together, but I'll just show you, this is what you need for the small batch. And then whenever I do our batch at home, I just add another can of the crushed tomatoes. And if I'm doing a full crock pot, I'll use 2 cans of this, 2 cans of this, and 2 of the smaller medium-sized cans of tomato sauce. And that would be enough to fill the crock pot. And then I'll add another onion, and I'll add a whole pound and a half full of ground beef with that. So that's usually what that would consist of. And then once we get started on this, I'll show you, what my spice strategies are. So we'll open these cans up, and plus at home I got the automatic can opener, but on the road I've got only this one. So we'll crack it to where you don't lose the lid, and just pour it right into your thing. And there goes my lid anyway. The good thing about this here is if, let's say you put it in the refrigerator and save it, you can do it in glass mason jars. That's what I do when I'm on the road. I use just a glass mason jar and with the lid, and then I'll seal it and put it right down into the ice water, or if you're using a cooler, or just stick it in the little refrigerator if you get a refrigerator. Now the trick about your paste is you cut both sides all the way through. This way you're not sitting there trying to dig it all out and everything else, but you'll like this little trick. I cut both things loose. I push it from the bottom out, sort of like a push-up. I remove the top lid. I push it down through the can until it sits out, and then I'll remove the lid off the top. Alright, and that is how you use that. Your onions, just a simple quick dice is what you need. Like I said, there's no reason to saute this at home or even in the crock pot, because I mean, if you're going to cook it on the stove for just a couple hours, yes, go on and do that. You know, if you want to saute them up. Now, if you do, I do it both ways actually at times. Now, if I'm going to saute this, I'll also what I'll do is I'll take the onions and some of my spices, and I'll add the spices right while I'm sauteing the onions, half of the spices. Remember, when you're building sauces like this, it's about layering your flavors. That's really the most important thing that you have to really worry about. You'll adjust your seasonings for your taste, you know, as you go, and you'll learn, but it's just all a learning method really on what you like. So I'll show you mine. I like a lot of spices. I'm into spices and seasonings, you know, pretty heavy, so I tend to use quite a bit, but I like flavor. And then I just dice it this way as well. And it's just a small, you know, a small dice is all it is. I'm sure you guys have many ways of cutting onions, but like I said, I don't think it's really necessary to get too much. I like them smaller when I'm cooking it all the way, and especially if I'm doing it raw. The reason that I like it that way is because it gives a time for the onions to actually melt down, and they'll cook down anyway when you're in your sauce. And just dump it right in your onion, or right in your sauce. The biggest thing is just getting all your ingredients in there. Now, when you use your ground beef, this is one that I would never buy this. You know how I buy. If I'm on the road and I'm wanting ground beef, I buy exactly what I want from the meat counter. So at this here is like a 2.5 pound thing of ground beef. So I'm going to use about a third of this. And what I like to do with the ground beef, to see how it's nice and shredded, I like to just break it apart. I don't like to crumble it or mess with it. I just sort of flake it around in the meat, and where it will just sort of melt and fall apart. You know, because it'll get tough and, you know, really hard that way. You know, I like it a little bit softer. And you just put it right in your meat. Buy good quality ground beef, you know, like a 80-20 or something like that. And when you do that, then you don't really have any problems with it. You know, a lot of the grease. A lot of people, like, you know, will rinse their beef and they'll cook it and they'll rinse the fat off of it. That's your flavor. Don't throw that away. I mean, eat it. I mean, you know, just cook right in there. If some people don't like it, it all floats to the top anyway when you get done. So, you know, use that. So now, we're going to go into the spice combinations here. Give you an idea of what I do in my spices. Now, the first thing that I do Anytime you use canned tomatoes, I like, because you don't know what they are and how sweet it is, I always add sugar. This is 1/4 cup of sugar. And I usually that's what I would use for a full pot. And I use about half of that, so it's about 1/8 of a pound or 1/8 of a cup of sugar. Basil. I always never measure, I just use the palm of my hand, and that's how much I would put in there. Alright. Here is your oregano. I broke my bottle for it, so I had to put it in here. And oregano, I use a little bit more, about like that. For this size, I'll use this whole 1/4 cup is what was in here. I'll use this whole amount if I'm making a full pot. And onion powder. What I'll do is my onion powder, look up here in the bottom here, and I'll just literally coat the whole top of this fairly well. You can see how I just sort of coat that. Same as my garlic. And then I'll put a layer of garlic on there. Alright. Don't be afraid to use your spices. I mean, that's what makes it. Of course, our typical bay leaves. On this one here, I use 2. 2 bay leaves. If it's a full pot, I would use 4. Then you have thyme. About that much thyme. Rosemary. I sort of like these bags when you're using them in the van, because you're not having to store the big, the big box, the jar. About that much rosemary. Okay. If I would say, that was probably about maybe a teaspoon. A rounded teaspoon of both these, and both of these, thyme and rosemary. Now, my little extra kick to give the people wondering about what's really in there is I use nutmeg. Not a lot. It's just going to put just a hint that people don't know what it is. All right. Just sprinkle a little bit of nutmeg in there. And what I use is, this is just a potato smasher, and I'll take this here and I'll whip this around. I'll turn this on once I get this mixed up, and come back about 15 minutes later. And the reason I like this here is because you can actually get it fully mixed. So you can actually get this fully mixed. And what I'll do on that is about 15 minutes later or so, I'll add probably about 6 ounces of water to this. And that helps thin it down and to get it, more of a tomato-based sauce. And that's the biggest thing. The only thing you have to worry about from that point on. Remember, the longer it cooks, the soupier it gets, the looser it gets. So don't overdo it right at first. Do this here, turn it on. If I'm in the van and I'm driving and I don't want to really cook or anything, or clean anything up, I'll actually get my sausage. I use the hot Italian sausage, but I use the links because I like the links. You can get that also from your grocery store as the pounds, just like your hamburger. You can do it that way, put it in that way if you want, or I use the sausage links, like the Johnsonville, I think they call it, or I get the ones from the deli usually. They're a little bit better tastier, I think. And then I'll put 2 sausage links right down inside of my sauce itself. And remember, you can buy those from your deli, 1, 2, or 3 at a time. You know, so you don't have any waste or anything you got to keep over. The only thing that you'll have left over is if you have anything left over, find your nearest neighbor, whoever might be sitting around or walking around, and invite them to dinner. It's a great conversation piece. You'd be surprised how many people I've broken bread with over the years, just because I was cooking. And you'd be surprised how many people would love it and enjoy it and sit there and chat with you, and you become very close friends in one day. So take your time to enjoy people and to spread that love around in the world. Share your meal. Remember, this spaghetti sauce here was not out of a can. This spaghetti sauce was built and made out of love. My love. Out of my hands. I put thought into it. I put my time into it, and I pour a lot of love into it. So it's going to be 10 times better than anything you've ever ate. So that's how I make my spaghetti sauce. I put the lid on this. Usually cook it on low. If it's a full pot, I'll start off on high, cook it for 2 hours on high, and then I'll drop it to low, and I'll cook it the rest of the time on low till I decide to eat. And I usually will not eat it unless it's cooked at least 5 hours. If I'm on the road, I start it out on my little crock pot. I can just keep it on low, and I can cook that on low anywhere from 4 to 6 hours. It's usually the best time. Remember, the longer it cooks, it still gets better, but if I do go over that, I usually will add a little bit more basil at the very end, about 30 minutes into the end of it, and that just sort of brightens the basil up. Basil sort of turns a little bitter if you let it cook too long. That's my opinion. But I've found if I add a little bit of fresh basil, or more of the dried basil, that just sort of brings the flavor back. And then also I'll adjust for salt and or sugar. I do not cook with salt because I never know who's going to eat with me. So for them and their health-wise, I will not use salt when I cook. I never do, actually, because I have high blood pressure. So I've just learned to train myself never to use salt when I cook. I like salt, but I like the taste of salt. So if I'm going to have salt, I want to taste that salt. I want to put it on myself at the end as a garnish on the meal, and actually taste it. So that's how I make spaghetti, guys. At the end, I have a little one of those 20-ounce cookers, or the water warmers. Most truckers use those. You can get those at the truck centers. And all it is for making coffee is just like 20 ounces of hot water. And about 15 minutes it boils the water pretty much. It's pretty hot. And I use angel hair is what I like. I use about the size, if you're pulling it out of a bottle or out of the box, about the size, just shy of a dime. It's about the size that I pull out. About the size of my little finger or my ring finger, in diameter wise. And then I'll break that in half or even thirds, and I'll drop it down in the water and let it cook for the time that it says to cook. And then that's my spaghetti, and then I'll just use my sauce on that. Then if I'm still got some left over, I'll usually make up some more spaghetti, some spaghetti or noodles, and then I'll just put that with that and mix it all together and store it in a mason jar by itself, already done. That way all I got to do is hit it in the microwave or put it in some boiling water for a few minutes, and bam, it's done. So that's a good way to do that. So try it. Hopefully you like it. I'm actually sure you will like it. It's probably one of the best. So go on and just give it a shot. Have a great day.